Welcome to Feel Seen Space. We are a digital platform designed for artists and creatives who yearn for more. At a time of massive change, what does it mean to create? What role does artistic expression serve for the individual and the collective? On this podcast, we try to answer these questions by interviewing artists on their holistic creative processes, their work, and their personal journey. Today, we're welcoming my friend Laure Gouraige. Laure is an author who shares her time between her purely artistic practice, which is writing novels, and working as a copywriter for fashion and beauty brands. In this conversation, she dives deep into the act of creation, reflecting on where it comes from and how to channel it. She argues that working today with a medium as sacred as literature requires to find a balance between the respect for the past, but also building something that is new and a reflection of our times. She also explains how her family dynamics really shaped her work and life, and how the act of writing itself allows her to face some of life's hardest challenges, like the loss of a loved one. It is a raw and really inspiring conversation. We'd like to thank Laure, especially because we've had a few technical hiccups, but we powered through and we're glad we did because this is a very powerful episode. Enjoy! Hi Laure, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're so excited to have this conversation with you today, so let's dive right into it. Where are you in the world right now?
I am back in Paris. I was in Tuscany for 3 weeks and it was absolutely gorgeous. And we came back to France on Sunday. And so now it's just, coming back to Paris and starting to get ready for September.
Amazing. So what are you up to right now? Are you working on some special project?
Well, it is for me a special September this year because it's the first time in my life that I am not going back to my previous job. I had a part-time job and I was doing a press review for NATO for 8 years. And it was something that I did out of interest and also because I wanted a financial security. I'm not doing this year anymore. So it is the first time that I am fully freelance and fully self-employed. And so it's a special time of the year because I have to figure, things out a little bit differently. As before, I had that security every month. And the question of what I was going to do next month was not really that important to me. If I wanted to take a project, I could. But if I didn't want to take a project, I could also refuse. And so now things are looking up very differently and I have to really think about what I want to prioritize. And I have those a couple of weeks left in August to figure this out and see exactly how I want, the end of 25 and 26 to look like.
That's great. That's great that you have a little bit of freedom to pick and choose your project and not feel too rushed to just jump into something else right away. Your path and journey is pretty impressive. You have amazing books published at one of the most prestigious publishing house in France. So I'm curious to hear more about the beginning of your journey. What kind of kid were you and did you grow up in a creative family?
So both of my parents were professors at university. So they had a lot of they would hate me for saying that, but free time, because they were teaching 9 hours a week. And during the rest of the time, they could focus on their own research. They were writing books or, they were writing articles. And so I've always seen them being at home because they used to teach while I was at school. So whenever I would come back from school, they were here. We had the same amount of vacation, so we would always go together on vacation. So basically home was where they were. So for me, growing up was having parents constantly at home reading or writing. So I grew up with the idea that it is possible to actually spend most of your time at home and enjoying what you do. But also I feel like my parents choose this career because they wanted to have that free time and they wanted to have the ability to choose what you want to do with your spare time. And so that really helped, I think, for me as a kid to see that I didn't have to have a 9-to-5 job and there were always other options. But the problem is because my parents were professors, they only knew that kind of path. And so it was very difficult for me to have an idea of something else that I could do with my time and at the same time have time for myself. And they were not great guides in that sense because for them, the only path was becoming a professor and then you'll have the time you want, for yourself. And so it took years for me to figure out, a different way to have the same amount of time and also to have some kind of stability. So that was a very tricky part. So yes, I grew up in a creative environment, and also I grew up in an environment where I knew that I wanted to have as much time for myself as possible to do the things that I love. And because that was my model, when I was growing up. My father, he used to write poems and he was a philosophy professor. And so he was reading constantly. My mom was a literature professor as well, and she was writing books and she was reading books, and we would travel to different places because they were curious, for example, with Scandinavian literature. So we would go to Sweden, and it was always that a very exciting and stimulating environment in that sense. But also I knew that I didn't want to become a teacher from the beginning, and it's something that I thought belonged to my parents. And that was the tricky part, was to figure out, if I don't want to be a professor and at the same time I want to have that time for myself, what do I do? So that was a very long road, and it took me years and years to figure this out, because in school this is not where they will teach you a different career path. I mean, it's either you're being a lawyer, a doctor, and everything is just so narrow-minded. And I feel like it's only when I started to work that I've seen other possibilities.
That's interesting, because in your first book, La Fille du Père, you talk about your relationship with your dad and the pressure you felt to be a teacher or to take on philosophy studies. And I would like for you, if you feel comfortable, to talk about this really intimate relationship and how it affected your choice in your career.
Yes, so I was a very shy kid. It was really difficult for me to raise my voice. And so I would just always go with what I was being told. And I think teaching was the only, and I don't know why, I still cannot really figure out why, was the only thing that I said no from the beginning. And because I refused to teach from such an early age, and I made a clear point to my parents that I would not become a professor, there was something that was, a little bit of a relief. They never pressured me to do that because they understood how much I did not want to do this. When it comes to philosophy, I actually went and studied philosophy. So I did feel a little pressure. But the thing is, when you are in this environment constantly, it's really difficult to understand what is your will and what is someone else's will. And I think at some point, it wasn't even clear to me that this was my father's choice and not mine. Everything got very confused, and I was absolutely convinced at the time that this was my own choice and that I wanted to do this and that was the best thing for me. And I actually loved it. I mean, philosophy studies are beautiful, and they taught me a lot. So I'm just not regretting at all that I made that choice, but I probably would have done things differently if I had more free will, I'm sure. But it was later that I realized that I wasn't happy, because at the time I was, in that circle, and to me it made sense, and all the choice that I've made complete sense. And it was probably around the age of 28 when I was seeing all of my friends doing things that they loved and going into their 30s, feeling like grown-ups and feeling really happy with where they are. And I really questioned myself, and I said, well, I'm 28 years old and I'm still my father's daughter more than anything else. I feel like whenever I have to really make a decision, I have to call him. I have to have his approval for everything. And I will turn 30 in 2 years, and I feel like a baby. And this kind of hit me really hard because I realized that I was not happy, that I had no career choice, no career path. I was lost totally. I had my job at NATO already because that was the only, money maker that I had. So that was one thing, but it was only part-time, and it was definitely not, I mean, I liked it, but it wasn't something that I would want to do for the rest of my life. So I felt very depressed. extremely sad, extremely lost, and I just didn't know what to do. I had like 1 year, I think the year of like 28, 29 years old, where it was just really, really difficult for me. I think I compared myself constantly to my friends and where they were at the same age, what they were doing. And for me, it was only no's and seeking my father approval for everything, which led to doing nothing, basically. And I started to write about that because I felt so depressed that I kind of had a little journal, every day where I would write about how difficult everything was and how lost I was. And I think at the time, I didn't really see the connection with my father, and I blamed it on turning 30. So I just thought, it was a little crisis of me. It was difficult for me to really point finger, on what was the real problem. And so I started to write, and I wrote for a year this little journal. And after a while, I had like probably 200 pages, and I thought, maybe I could do something, with that. Let's make it into something else. And so I decided to rewrite it, edit it, and make it more into a story than an actual journal, and really like find a way to reconnect it and, really tell a story from the beginning to the end. And I finished it. And the day of my 30th birthday on May 9, I decided to mail it to 5 publishers because I thought, well, it's going so wrong. So what else could go wrong, I might as well just try to do something with it. And so I went to the post office and I mailed my manuscript. And maybe not even a month later, I get an email from my publisher saying, well, I really liked your manuscript. Can you come to the office and we could talk about it? And so I went to his office and we discussed it. It was the first novel for me. So it was full of flaws, and it was somehow, I think, very pretentious at the same time. I would not want to read this again. And so we discussed a lot, and he said, well, I think it would be maybe more interesting to do this and to go there. And so I came back at home and I rewrote the book for about 6 months, and I mailed the book again to my publisher, and then we had another discussion together. But he thought that this was not going somewhere, and he was right. He said it in a very simple way. Say, I feel like you're not saying what you should be saying. I kept, circling back and forth around the big question, but I just couldn't really say anything. And so he said, I'm really sorry, but I don't think this is the right book, and we're not going to publish it. But I feel like you have something to say, but you won't say it. And I was, of course, heartbroken because it took me more than 6 months to rewrite it, and it was a lot of energy and a lot of time. And so I was very, very sad. And I don't know, one morning I woke up and then I said, well, maybe he's right. Maybe I'm not telling the truth, and maybe I'm not telling the truth to myself. And the truth is, today I have something to address to my father. This is where it started. I started to write a letter to my father, and the letter turned out into being a book. And I sent this book 6 months later to my publisher, and he emailed me back and said, that's it, we'll publish it. We're done.
So you're working in collaboration with your editor, POL, very closely. Your publisher is here to guide you, but also you want to make sure to work with someone that understands your ideas, and you want to keep your creative freedom, I assume. So I would love to hear more about the collaboration and how does it work?
Sure. It's actually something that I would like to also work on because I have talked to many other writers, and I have observed that there are as many different relationships as there is writers and publishers. And I know at POL, my publisher is extremely available, and I don't feel like I ask for his input enough. I have a tendency to have the idea of a project, and then I do it on my own. Then I finish it, then I send him the book, he reads it, and then from there we work together on the book. But I feel like it would be maybe not more interesting, but different if I could ask him from the beginning, for his input and discuss with him. And that's what I've done for the 4th book that I'm writing now. Instead of jumping into the idea on my own, I had a meeting with him and I told him the idea that I had. And we really had a great conversation together before the book was even written. And that was the first time I've ever done that. Everything that he said was extremely important and very interesting to me. So I've started to write the book after that, and I've sent him, which I've never done before, I've sent him half of the book before I finish it. So we had another discussion, and this was also very interesting because he gave me a lot of very interesting comments, and this will help me to do the other part of the book. As you said, it is also very important to have creative freedom, and I think he knows it because he's also a writer. And so he never puts pressure, and he never is really directive on what you should be doing or what you should be writing. He never said, you should do that or you should write that. He's always very open, and he would always say things like, I think maybe this direction would be interesting, but if you don't feel like it, don't go there, So it's always very easy to keep your creative freedom. And also for the previous book, there were one character in the book that he didn't like, and I stood for this character until the end. I knew that I liked this character for one reason and he didn't like this character for another reason, but I felt like at this point it wasn't even a matter of creativity. It was just his own sensibility, I would say. And I really felt like I had to fight, and I said to him, well, I understand your point of view, but I will keep this character exactly as I meant because he is there for a reason, and I think it's important that he stays there. And it was like, yeah, okay, that's that's it. I just wanted you to know what I think, but that's okay. And so it's always very easy to have a discussion with him. But I know also that many writers include him more into the creative process. I know they are have friends who literally like send him 2 sentences and are like, do you like it? Is that all right? So he's very open to any form of creative process, and he's very open to whatever writers want from him. And so I'm trying to change that for the first time, and I'm trying to include him more this time, because I feel like also when you've completely finished a project and then you hand it over to him, it feels more like he's being the professor, grading you and being like, oh, this is yes, no, I like this, I don't like that. But if you include him from the beginning and it sounds more like a discussion, you feel less protective over what you've done, because it's been something that you've discussed together and you've been able to also defend yourself before the book is even there, and make him understand your point of view and why you're doing this and that. So I think it's an interesting way to do things, and I'm trying to be more open to this new creative process with him. So we'll see. That this is what I'm trying to implement now. So
it's great that you found someone that you can be fully open with and you feel respected and heard, because also all your books are so personal, especially the first one. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about when you did this letter to your father. Did you feel a sense of liberation because you got the courage to send your first text to publishers? You were just, okay, I'm almost 30, I want to do something for myself and I want to feel that I have the free will to be fully independent. So what was the feeling when you sent out your first text?
The first feeling was just fear. It was complete fear. At some point I thought about not publishing it because I didn't have the courage to hand it to my father. And I thought if it didn't get published, then I can hide it, and he would never know about it. And so at first I wanted to run away from everything that I've started. I thought this was a horrible idea, and I thought this was too personal. It's something that I should giving as a letter, and it should be only between the two of us. I felt like, why am I making this public? Why am I putting myself in this situation? I'm hurting him. I'm hurting myself. Nothing good can come out of this. So it was just not a good place to be in. At the same time, it's very contradictory, but at the same time, I felt that maybe all of what my father has done has led me to that place, bad or good, So if it led me to that, maybe I have to do something with it. And maybe writing the book is exactly what I have to do with it. And also because he's so passionate about literature and novels, I thought maybe this is the only way or the only place where we could connect or reconnect together. And this was the only thing that, gave me the courage to go through this. So it was very hard. I decided to give him the book before it got published, because the launch, I wanted it to be an exciting moment and a moment of joy, and I didn't want it to be the same time where he was going to read the book. And so he would have literally probably ruined, the entire mood or the excitement. So I decided to send him the PDF 3 or 4 months before the launch of the book. He read the book and we did not really have a conversation immediately. And I understood later that he felt like this was just a complete creation, that this has nothing, no actual roots in reality. So he didn't take it the wrong way, because for him, even his own character was a fiction. So this made me feel not liberated at all, because I felt like I did that because I wanted to have a discussion with him. And so the letter and the book, all of this was meant for me to sit down with him and say, can we discuss this? But because he felt like this was a fiction and that this wasn't him and this wasn't me, then of course we had nothing to talk about. I felt extremely frustrated for a few months because the writing of the book itself was very difficult. It was a lot of crying. I had to reconnect with old memories that was not pleasant at all. And because of that, I felt it's okay that I go through this, because at the end, it will serve me. And because we did not have that talk together, I felt like I did all of this for nothing. I wasn't able at the time to see the impact or the effect that just the process of writing would have on me. It is only months and months later that I felt that I had changed, that I did not felt the need for my father's approval like I did before, that I felt more free. And also the funny thing is that he changed also. He never said anything, but he changed. We are 5 years later and my father is not the same father that he was 5 years ago. But we never had that discussion. We never had a talk, but we both changed. And it's very interesting to observe, but it took me a while, to see it. And it's only maybe a year after the book got published that I was thinking about things and I was like, oh, this has changed. Oh, that is different. Oh, he's not doing this anymore. Oh, I'm not expecting this anymore. After a while, you understand that, oh, wow, okay, interesting. And so I've started to observe our relationship and how it has changed. And again, 5 years later, it has tremendously changed. And I felt like this book was the best thing that ever happened to me. This book was going to be a deal breaker with him. I thought I was going to hand him the book. We're going to have the final discussion and we will be done. I thought that that's what was going to happen. I thought we would never talk again. He would never talk to me again. And that would be it, And I think the year that I had before the publishing of the book was a year where I got mentally ready to never speak to my father again. That's what I did. For a year, I prepared myself to, we are not going to talk, and that's going to be it. And the fact that it didn't happen, and the fact that not only we are still talking, but our relationship, I feel, is better than ever, is very foreign to me. It's not something that I had planned at all, not something that I had expected, or not even something that I had hoped for, because I was extremely hopeless when it came to our relationship. So it was for me a huge surprise that it turned out to be so great.
And do you feel for you writing is a form of therapy?
Well, it's extremely complicated, I think, because I don't want it to be. I think there should be literature and therapy. And I think this is two complete different things. But I have to be honest and say that I have started to write out of an urgent need. So yes, I think for this first book, it was some kind of therapy, but I also was in therapy at the time, and I still am. And I think I wouldn't have been able also to write that book and to go through this path if I didn't do therapy at the time, because writing a book is very lonely. And when you write about memories that are very difficult, you feel very lonely and you bring back very difficult times, and you feel like, oh, wow, so now I'm facing this and I'm here, with this memory that I will describe, that I will write about. And then what? And I think going through therapy really helps you because you have a moral support that will feel like you're not alone. So I think writing is a great process, but it should not be the only process.
And speaking of moral support, did you have any mentors or do you have mentor right now that every time that you have self-doubt or you have a question that you can go to and you really feel seen with them?
Interesting. I used to think when I was a lot younger that my father was a mentor, which was where things were a bit tricky. He was the person that I would go to for everything because he's also very bright and very smart. He would be like a very big figure in my life. And so I think also for the past few years, it's been interesting for me to reshape that figure and to find this mentorship in other people. And I feel like it's something that I'm trying to do, as I said earlier, with, for example, my publisher, trying to have him, more involved into the creative process and also ask him, question about, writing, but also maybe about other things. I think I have also been attracted to the wrong people a lot of time. I wanted mentor out of people that were not good for me at all. So I feel like my journey right now for the past couple of years is trying to change that and reframing, my relationship to mentors and to other people. I thought that I knew what a mentor was, and I think I had no idea. I thought a mentor was someone who would tell you what to do and who would have some kind of authority on you. And I was completely wrong. I got the mentorship completely wrong. So it's been difficult for me to understand it differently and to think maybe you can have a mentor and be exactly as you said, feel seen, and not someone that would validate what you do and who you would seek approval for everything. I think the relationship that I had with my father kind of shaped the other relationship that I have with other people. And so I thought that that was the normal way of doing things. So I'm still, I'm not there yet, but I hope one day I will have a sane relationship with a mentor and something that is really fulfilling and someone who would really make me feel seen and great about myself.
It's interesting that you're also talking about toxicity, even with a mentor, which I feel in every single industry you can find toxic relationship or toxic situation, and it's hard to realize that you're in it, especially with someone that you look up to. I would like to hear more about what type of, let's say, toxic relationship in your industry you faced and how did you realize that it wasn't for you and you could step out and be empowered after?
I am still, as I said, a little bit struggling with this. But again, because my relationship with my father was so complex, I think it shaped my other relationships. And so I was searching for mentors or people that would just be, a constant presence, but also very heavy. And so instead of running away from them, I'll be attracted to them. When I had my first job in 2014, it wasn't my dream job at all. It was just something that I did because I needed the money and I needed the experience. It was in fashion. And I realized after a few months that my boss was extremely toxic, but I didn't see it coming at the beginning because when I started to work with her, she had that way of always making you feel seen, exactly, making you feel like you are the greatest human being, that you are so wonderful, that she's been, wanting someone like you for years, and you're a jewel, and etc., etc. And then things started to change a little bit when she was saying, because she knew that I was making friends with other people in the company. And so one day she started telling me that I should not trust anyone because everybody there are snakes, and that if they're being nice to me in person, they're saying the most horrible thing behind my back. And she's the only one that I should be trusting because she's the only one, who wants good things for me. And the other one are just the most horrible human beings ever. And so she said that. And at first, I kind of believed her, and I started to question the relationship that I have built with other colleagues. And at some point, I thought maybe I should talk to someone about this. And so one of my friends with this company, I told her, you know what? She keeps telling me that everybody hates me and that she's the only one who wants good things for me. What do you think about that? Because I'm starting to doubt myself. And my friend told me that this is a lie and that she's been doing this with everybody else. And so I started to tell everyone what she told me. I said, well, she said that about you, that you said about me, etc., etc. And then I realized that this was all fake and that everybody knew about this. And that it was a constant pattern, that she was doing with new recruits. And because she was hoping, to have them under her wings and to keep them under her wings, she had a way to wanted to isolate you from everybody else, so she could feel she could have more power on you. And that was really difficult. I think I only stayed at that job for a year and a half, and I think she was mainly the reason why I quit. Again, it wasn't my dream job, but I would have stayed longer if it wasn't for her, because I liked all of the other people there. I made my best friend there. So I would have stayed probably like 3 or 4 years, but because of her, I had to run away. And there were really no other options. I would come to the office in the morning crying. I would leave crying. It was just a constant feeling of fear. So it was a matter of I had to, save myself. And again, I think the same pattern happened later, not within a company, maybe with other people, maybe friends, in general. And it's only for a year, I would say, a year and a half now, that I feel like I can recognize that pattern in people and stay away from it. But it took me 10 years, I think, because during 10 years, I still believe that this was, a normal behavior, or not maybe normal, but it took me a very long time to identify this and say, well, this is a problem. This is an issue. We have to do something about it. And I think now I do want to listen more to my guts when I meet people, because I feel like if I had listened to my guts and to what I thought before, I would have run away right away. Now I want to do that more. And if I feel like something is off, I don't want to try anything else with this person. So that's what I'm trying to implement now.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because so many people in the fashion industry has a similar story. And it's great that now you have boundaries, and it's really important to stand by them.
Do you ever lose track on your creative projects? Maybe you're a professional artist or creative, but what used to be your passion now feels uninspiring. Or maybe you decided to pursue a safer career path, but you just know you have that artistic side of you that's dying to come out. At Feel Seen Space, our mission is to get you back in touch with your creativity, your flow, and your purpose. If you're ready to feel seen, we offer one-on-one holistic mentoring sessions designed to reconnect you to your inner artist. You'll find all the information at the link in the show notes. We hope to see you soon.
You mentioned, of course, that you have a real love for your craft, which is putting words together, and that has been very clear for you for a long time. But now you share that same craft between different outlets, some of them purely artistic, like your literature, but some of them more commercial, like what you do as a freelance copywriter. And so I was wondering, how is it to have the same activity but with different outlets? And do you feel like you found a balance between these different aspects of your job?
Very interesting. I really enjoy that because it's two complete different outlets, as you said. When I write, I only have myself to report to. So if I write a sentence or a paragraph and then I read it, then it is only up to me to find it good or to find it bad. And I'm the only one, the only judge until my publisher comes in. But before, it's only me. And sometimes it's also very overwhelming because you're like, well, okay, I like this part, but why do I like this part? And the fact that I have the chance to also do copywriting and write for others it's very interesting for me to confront my opinion to someone else. Because then, for example, if I write, let's say, a press review for a brand, and then I will send a first version, a first draft, and then the first draft would come back with notes on it, and it forced me, to question, what I've done and what I've written. And it's very interesting for me because, as I said, being a writer is a very lonely job. You're always on your own, and you do the question and the answers. And so having someone sometimes, to tell you, I think it's a little bit, I don't know, the way to say that is a bit cheap, or it's a bit that or this, that it forces you to, for once, be in a dialogue with someone else. So I really enjoy that. And also because usually in copywriting, there's a lot to take in. It's not just, write a page about this perfume. There's a lot of prompts, that you have to include in the writing process. It's also a bit of a challenge, each time, wondering how you're going to manage to write something inspiring, write something beautiful, and also, include all the commercial aspects from the job. And so that's always a really big challenge that I kind of like. And when you finish, you're like, oh, okay, that was fun, and it's always very pleasant to see how you managed to make everything fit. Because at the beginning, there were many times where I was like, oh, that's impossible. I'm never going to manage to do this. There is no way, there's, for example, too many prompts, or maybe sometimes it's contradictory. They would tell you, let's say, talk about Christmas, but never mention Christmas, talk about, things like this constantly. So you have to be funny, but you never be sarcastic, for example. And so you're always like, wow, I have to jungle, with so many different do's and don'ts. And when you manage to combine everything and it still looks like something that is readable, it's quite exciting. So I do enjoy having those two aspects of my job.
Amazing. So you have found that balance.
Yes.
And then what is your take? Because as you know, Roxanne and I come from the fashion side, but what is your take on the current state of literature in France and the current state of the publishing industry?
Very interesting. I think compared to other countries in Europe, I would say France is very into, how can I put it in English? Autobiography, like the first book that I wrote about my father. We have a big thing. We call that, I don't know if that would work in English, but subjective literature, like the I literature. And I think it's very, very, very huge in France, whereas it's not that big in other countries in Europe, where they do more fiction than we do in France. For the past 10 years, writing about yourself and about your own perspective and how you see the world in general has become huge. And with the Nobel Prize that Annie Arnaud received last year, I think this was the affirmation, the statement that this is what we do here in France. And we want to value this kind of literature, I think it's very interesting. I think I was a bit rejecting this years ago because I thought, well, fiction is better, fiction is greater. And I think I was wrong. I think fiction is great, and writing from your own perspective brings something else, because you also have to look at the history of the French literature. And if you read books from the 20th and the 19th and the 18th, I mean, fiction has been huge, and it's been the most beautiful, I think you'll ever get. And I think maybe if we have to do something in the 21st century, maybe this is it. Maybe this is actually taking literature and make it different. And I think writing about our own perspective and our own subjectivity brings something new. As I don't think we could write like Proust or like Gracq, for example, anymore. I don't think this would even be acceptable or doable anymore. So we have to figure out what to do as writer now in this environment and in this century. I think reflecting on a different perspective is the only way to not redo what's been done before.
That's actually interesting, because even within your own work, your own personal work, I feel like you've already tried a lot of different things and you're super open to new genres. And I know that the project you're currently working on is very, very, very different from where you started. So how much overall of your work do you think is inspired by your own life, and how much of it is inspired by other people's lives, and how much of it is just pure imagination?
I think it's always easier to start with what you know. So it's been a little bit my journey, you know, to start talking about something very, very, very personal, very intimate. Then the second book was still about me, but a lot less. And I had managed to incorporate a lot of fiction in it. So I think it would be maybe, let's say, 60-40%. And then the third book was even more fiction. So I think my journey is I started writing about very intimate situation. And the more I write, the less I want to go in that direction. And so I want to kind of free myself from my own story and from myself. And I want to write more about what I don't know. And it's true that the project that I'm working on now has really nothing to do with my life and nothing to do with my surrounding. And it's a complete fiction at a point where each time that I write, I feel like I'm almost going into another space or another dimension, you know? So that's quite exciting. But I mean, I won't lie, even in that specific space, there are necessarily things that I've took from my experience, from other people, you know, little details that you recognize when you read, you're like, oh, okay, that was, okay, interesting. So there's no way to completely erase yourself from what you write. It's impossible, you know, so there's always a little bit of you.
Mm-hmm. And so I'm also curious about what fuels your creativity, because it sounds like at first, when you started that first text, it was very much out of desperation. It was something very deep and very, as you said, almost painful as a process. But now obviously you're in a very different space in your life, in your relationship with your family, and the text that you're working on, as you said, is so incredibly different. So what now is the fuel to your writing?
Interesting. Sometimes I don't know, to be honest. I don't know why, for example, I have different ideas of different projects, and I don't know why this idea will become a book and not the other one. It's that momentum where it's very confusing. You don't know why, but this one is the right one. I think I enter literature, as you said, as almost an emergency and a need, but I think I was always, you know, attracted somehow to writing. So I think writing about me was an excuse, you know, to write, because I probably did not know exactly how to start. And I think starting by me was the easiest way to do it. So it was an excuse, but I think now that I'm done with excusing myself and about to write about something else, it gives me more freedom to choose what I want to write about. And I don't feel like I have to write something, you know, game changer. I feel like I just want to write something that piques my curiosity. Sometimes it can start out of something very simple and you don't know exactly why this tiny little thing is the reason why you will write that book. Sometimes it can also be because of what I read. For example, the last book was, I think, entirely fueled by a reading that I did previously. I was reading this book from Sally Rooney, A Conversation with Friends, and I finished the book and I said to myself, oh wow, she wrote about friendship, and I've been wanting to write about fashion for a long time, but I was never able to understand and to see how I would write about fashion. And I said, well, yes, I know exactly how now. I'm going to do it through friends and friendship, because that's what matters to me. And so that was the starting point, you know, of the third book. So sometimes it's just little things like this sparks an idea and the idea becomes a book.
So it sounds like you grew a lot within the past years, both in your life and in your practice. At Filsine, we really believe that creation and art are a healing modality, that by creating, we are healing. Do you feel like that was the case for you?
Yes, I think completely. I think the two things are so related because creativity is so intimate that for sure it just unblocks so much. For example, you know, I've been wanted to write about my cat's death for a long time because I feel it's something that we don't really address much, the pain that you have when your animal dies. And she passed away 3 years ago. And I've always thought, you know, there's something that I want to write, that I want to say. I feel like I haven't really completely healed, and I feel like it's something that I somehow want to bring into life through writing. And I just didn't know how, and I just felt like it was very difficult to address. And unfortunately, my grandmother passed away earlier this year. And this death also made me rethink this entire thing. And I've been started to write earlier this summer about the process of healing after those two losses. Also because my grandmother was really old, my cat was old. So it was like, how can I say that? It's not like it was unexpected, you know? And sometimes you feel like it's part of the normal way of things, which it is, but it doesn't make it less hard and less difficult. And I was very surprised that I was able to write so much about it. And it turns out now that I have a little tiny book that I did not expect to have at all. And I think I will finish it by the end of the month, and it will be what it will be. I don't know exactly what it is right now, but it has made a very, very big difference in my process of healing. And even though it's difficult to write it, you know, because it just brings back so much difficult memories and just it puts me back into thinking about those loss. But at the same time, I can see how much better I feel when I write about the loss of my cat and of my grandmother. I see how much, you know, I say things that I was not able to say at the time. The pain that I feel, I don't know how I can put that, but I feel almost less alone because I feel like if I can write about this, then maybe someone else can read it and maybe someone else can relate to it. And so this whole thing feels like part of being in a bigger, not community, but in a larger scale, you know, than just me.
That's so interesting because what you described reminds me a lot about why I picked up painting in the first place a few years ago. And it was also to process an emotion that was too big to face on its own, which was the pain of a breakup, which is a form of grief also. But it was my way to like fully dive into my feelings and to out them and process them in the process. So it's interesting to see that there's a parallel here. And do you feel like the opposite is true? Like as a reader, as a person who's witnessing or experiencing a work of art, do you feel like you yourself have healed from other art pieces or from books? Are there any books that change your life?
I think sometimes, and I think it's a bit strange, but just the idea that books or paintings or art is there on its own just makes me feel better, you know, just knowing that there is this, you know, and there's not even one particular book or one painting, but the fact that I know if I need to, or the fact that I know that it's there just helps me a lot. I've always liked going to museums on my own. I always feel like it's a very quiet place. It's almost like a meditation, you know. Everyone usually is pretty quiet and calm. Less now, I feel like people are taking selfies, you know, in front of paintings, which was not the case years ago. But I felt this like it was a great place to reflect because those rooms are usually very big and, you know, you feel so tiny, you know, in that space. And this has always made me feel very inspired and very calm at the same time. And I really, really enjoy the space that it will give. Yeah, museums are a great part for me of the creative and the healing process at the same time.
And then in terms of literature, do you feel like you have authors that influenced you particularly? You mentioned Annie Ernaux, but are there any other people who you think you really draw from?
Yes, there are many. I mentioned earlier also Sally Rooney, who I'm really, really love to read. She's an amazing writer. She really inspired me into saying that, again, we're in the 21st century. What can we do now, you know, that makes sense for us as writers and that will translate the world as it is now? And I feel like it's very difficult as a writer to just separate yourself from the past and say, well, you know, those writers did amazing, you know, in the 20th centuries and before, but obviously this is not the way we write now. It's very difficult, I think, to accept that because when you go in school, they only teach you classic literature and they tell you that this is, you know, what you have to aspire to. And anything that is not as great is trash, basically. And I think for us, I mean, at least for myself, it's been a really big struggle to accept that you can be a writer and not write like Proust or Victor Hugo or, you know, and you have to understand that there's something else that has to be said and it will be done differently than it's been done before. What is important is to be an artist and a writer of your time, to be able to translate what's going on in your time on the paper. And I feel like someone like Sally Rooney really allowed me to do that. And because she had such a big success with her 2 first books, it really allowed me to say, you have the proof that it is possible to write differently, to also be completely in your time, and to be very respected as a writer as well.
Really interesting. And so speaking of being a woman of your time, now it feels like every job is becoming quite public and we all need to have a sort of persona, personal brand. How do you navigate that as an author? Because I know that, as you said, writing is very intimate, it's sometimes lonely. But then when the book comes out, suddenly you have to like go meet readers and meet bookstores and maybe do radios and TV shows and all of that. So how is that transition for you between the moments where the book is only yours and then when it goes out in the world in such a public way?
It's a very difficult transition. I don't handle it well at all. So I'm not an example. It's very hard because I always feel like I say the wrong things, that I never quite grasp, what I want to say. So I always come out very frustrated with what I've said. I always feel like I've missed the point, that I did not answer the question properly. So it's always a very, very difficult time for me. I really like meeting readers. It's always very fun. I like being in bookstores also, because usually people ask very interesting questions. And I really enjoy that time because it takes you out of your loneliness. And it's interesting also to put faces, on readers. So that's quite exciting. But I don't really enjoy the process of going to interviews because I always feel like I always struggle finding the right balance between saying enough and not saying enough. For example, when it came to the book about my father, I felt like I wanted to tell more, but at the same time, I felt like I needed to be protective, and not just for myself, but for my father also, because that's not fair to him, So it was a very difficult balance to find. I was struggling constantly. I knew that journalists kept asking me questions and wanted more from me because obviously the subject was quite rich, and I always felt like I was being very protective and circling around the answer and not really giving them what they were expecting. And that was it was very difficult, I think, to do. And I disliked it a lot. Fortunately for the third one, because it wasn't related to me almost at all, I felt more free. And I felt like it was easier for me to talk about this book because it did not involve any kind of personal relationship or, intimacy. So it was more easy for me to talk about it as a subject. I felt like I had a greater distance to the subject that I was talking about. And also people sometimes, they're just so much greater readers than you are. They see things and they read things that you don't. And so they say things and you're amazed and you're like, oh, wow, I wouldn't have been able to see that. And so I'm constantly amazed at what people have to say. And so for me, it would be even better to just sit there and listen and be like, oh, really, really? Because I'm learning a great deal, So that, for me, it would be ideal not to say a word,
Well, then we thank you even more for doing this interview because it was really incredible and you did say a lot of wonderful things that I'm sure will inspire so many people.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you very much. I was very pleased to have this conversation with you, and it was wonderful. Thank you.
That's it for today's episode. We thank our guests for their trust, and we thank you for being a part of our community. If you like this episode and want to support our work, consider ranking our podcast on Apple or Spotify. And if you know someone who could benefit from this conversation, please share our work with them to help them spread the dream of a conscious, creative community. Talk soon.